welcome to the show. Kirk, what's your issue?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess to get where we're at with current issues, I can go back in time a little bit. There's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of concerns, and we've lost him, and now we have a number of properties to worry about.
How many properties does your mom own?
My mom now, as of 2 weeks ago, we now have 4 properties in her name, and we have to liquidate. We need to finish emptying those out, which is a huge job, and take care of those properties. And I need to be sure that everything's positioned correctly with the trust and wealth transfer so that we don't make any mistakes.
Are all the properties in the trust? Are all the properties labeled, the owner is the trust?
You know, that we need to look into. We made sure that my mom's name is on all the properties, including the 2 newly purchased properties, but in terms of how that's going to be handled with the trust, or if we need to put those in the trust, because we did list both of the newly purchased homes with one of the siblings.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yeah.
So, all right, you're gonna wanna fix that. You're gonna wanna quitclaim all homes in the trust, in the living trust.
And I think there's the issue of TOD, whether or not that makes sense. Is that correct?
POD, now all states don't allow POD, the
Right.
state of Colorado does.
So with the home here, we could do it that way, because that one, they get it, my sister set up with a home, one home is gonna go to my brother, one home to me, so whether or not they should be in the trust or go just directly.
Okay, so the way your dad and your mom,
Right.
and now your mom's alive, she doesn't want the estate to equally go to each, she doesn't want the estate to be split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Well,
She wants to give a specific home to each child.
well, what's in the trust will be split equally, but as there are specific homes that are gonna go to each child, I think those probably for tax purposes and everything else make sense, but I don't know.
If there is a large capital gain, and when mom passes, the capital gain is wiped out, the basis goes to 0. So there's no tax if your sister or you or your brother wants to sell the property,
Okay.
if it's in mom's trust. If you put a home in a joint account and mom passes.
And it just passes through.
Well, it all depends. There's the POD in
POD,
Colorado. We can
yeah.
look at this POD in Arizona and POD in Georgia.
Well, yeah.
But paid on death just basically means it's a way to get a stepped up in basis,
Okay.
and it's a way to say avoids probate. It immediately becomes ownership of the POD upon the death.
So I think that makes sense for the home here. The home in Arizona, I don't think it's gonna be an issue because we'll be selling that soon.
You're gonna be selling the home.
that soon, but the home in Georgia where they don't have that option.
They don't? I'm not sure they do.
They don't have the POD.
POD,
Right,
okay.
we did look that up. They don't have that. That might best be left as it is going with ownership by my mom and brother.
I would say ownership by your mom. If you put it as your brother, you're not gonna get the stepped up in basis.
Okay, but if there's no POD, is there a way to?
Well, the way you do it is, you basically put in the trust document that your brother gets the Georgia home.
So just quitclaim it, so it's just in my mom's name at.
No, it's not in your mom's name. Quitclaim it to where it's
to the
only.
trust.
It's just a trust.
Trust, but specify within the trust.
That your brother gets the Georgia home.
Okay,
That's the simple way of doing it. Then you get the stepped up in basis,
Okay.
and your brother will bequeathed that.
Okay.
And then it's just a pro rata share of what's left in the trust.
Right,
Does that make sense?
yes, that makes sense.
Okay, so you're selling one property in Colorado, you're selling one property in Arizona.
Yes,
Okay, so at that point, the money will be essentially invested in an account, and then upon death, it will be split equally.
the
It's just
insurance
math.
goes right into the trust, I believe.
So your dad has an insurance policy?
Right.
So that insurance policy,
Yeah.
your parents, so it was the second to die.
Right.
So, okay, and you're still paying on that, it's in force.
Yeah. Right.
And then when the nice thing about the insurance policy is that in the estate tax laws, whether it's in a trust or outside the trust, your dad probably did this years ago when the estate tax was much lower. So you don't have to worry about the estate tax issue. So the nice thing about that is that the insurance is gonna be a tax-free event, it's gonna go into the trust, and then that can be divvied up accordingly.
Right, with everything else.
Okay, now you also said your dad has a charitable trust. He's giving money to charity.
Right.
Okay, now let me ask you a question. In that charitable trust, is it say to go to a qualified charity or a specific charity?
I believe it can go to.
A qualified charity.
Right.
And let me ask you a question. I know that you have a lot of charitable leanings. Is that something that you want to do, is start your own charity?
It's certainly of interest.
Well, one thing you could do is if you started your own charity, if it's a legal 501c3, what you can do is you could then specify in that charitable trust that upon mom's passing, that money would go to a legal charity with you designate as your charity.
Right, so
And-
we can,
Yes.
as a family, do something worthwhile.
Yes.
Would have pleased both
And that's,
parents.
as
right?
long as it sounds like it does, as long as your trust doesn't specifically
Okay.
name a charity, if it's a legal charitable entity, become a
Right,
legal charitable
right.
entity.
Or
And that's a good-
specifically change it, or specifically lists, but says it can be changed to.
Yeah.
Right, another.
Yeah, and then therefore you can use it for a philanthropic cause that you
Right.
and your family are passionate about.
Right.
Whatever it may be.
Okay.
So I think that's an exciting thing you could
Sure.
look at.
Uh-huh.
So there's some things that you really want to get around, your head around. We want to look at the ownership of every house. You're going to sell some homes, so I wouldn't worry about putting those homes in trust
Right.
upon selling those homes.
I think one is in the trust and, well, actually, both of those.
Are in the
I
trust.
think both of those homes, I believe, are in the trust. It's just the newer homes, we
Okay.
have to look at. I don't think they've been specifically put in the trust and we,
They were
I guess.
put in joint names. because
Right.
You guys
So,
had this.
so if we, yeah, we're done sort of, I mean, the opportunities came up and they were done quickly. So we can look if we need to reposition those, and then, in terms of the funds that are gonna come from the house sales with other, investments, certainly always concerned about, how we're positioned going forward and issues of diversification, what's going on with interest rates, how to best position ourselves.
Well, what's interesting right now is, pardon the pun, interest rates. What's interesting is that interest rates are at almost a 20-year high.
Right.
And that would allow you to actually use the interest from some very safe investments. In other words, if you put your money in a Treasury bill right now, you can get 5+%. If you use that interest and use a market leverage tool, you can actually get market returns and totally protected with a Treasury. One of the tools we use here at our firm, we call them index Treasury notes. And definitely, if you go to our website and read an article on that, I'd be more than happy to send some information. So you can get the safety of a Treasury, but you can get the exposure of the stock market. And they're pretty liquid. I mean, we tie those things up 6 months a year and a half on the outside, so they're
Okay.
not tying your money up like an annuity for 30 years. Something to take a look at. Let me ask you, just getting back to the trust for a minute, do you have any children?
No.
Okay, and you're not married?
That's great.
Okay. Now, when your mom passes, is everything going outright to each child? 1/3 of the estate to you, 1/3 to your brother, 1/3 to your sister?
I believe so.
Okay.
I certainly hope so.
One of the things you may want to look at is what we call generation skip planning. Benefit of that is by keeping it in trust, there's some benefits. In a litigious environment, one of the advantages of generation skip planning is it protects your money from lawsuits and divorces. And divorce rate's above 50% today, so, but it's an interesting way to look at it. Don't leave your money outright to your children, leave your money in trust to your children. In other words, it's very simple. You as the trustee are the key holder, and the key holder has control, but you don't actually own the money. You can use the money, health, education, support, maintenance, and income. And what's nice about that is it kind of protects you. There are some negatives. Some of the negative is you have to file another tax return on just not your own. You have to file a trust tax return. And that may be something your sister, you, or your brother don't want to do. But it might be better than just losing $2 million in a lawsuit.
Right.
God forbid you get in a car accident, they find out that Kirk is worth $3 million, they're gonna sue above insurance limits, and then the next thing you know, you're in this lawsuit. But if you have everything in trust, you legally don't have any assets, the insurance company does a search and says, Kirk is broke, we're not gonna go after. That's how insurance companies work. So I thought that's just something you could look at. Generations get planning, the negatives and positives of that. Let's talk about your retirement plans. Your parents, your mom, dad had some retirement plans, correct? How are they labeled? Are they labeled in trust, do you know?
Well, I believe everything's in the trust.
Well, you don't want to have your IRAs in the trust. That's
Okay.
not something you want to do. And the reason for that is when George Bush changed the IRA laws, the 2006 Tax Relief Act, he basically made it very ambiguous as far as retirement planning, and said that if a retirement plan doesn't have a named beneficiary, then it becomes, it has to be liquidated
Okay.
upon death, and that causes a huge tax problem. Now, what happened was the 2017 Relief Act that Trump signed got rid of what we call the stretch IRA. Now it's a 10-year liquidation plan. So the stretch is kind of gone. It's called the 10-year rule. But so you don't want to particularly leave your money in the trust. You want to have named beneficiaries. So let's just make sure the primary beneficiaries should be you, your brother, and your sister, and maybe the contingent is your sister's son.
Right.
And that's how it should be labeled.
Right, because,
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Quinky? I mean, Mr. Kirk?